Are you looking for an insightful walkthrough of the STAAR 2023 ELA test? In this video, I will break down the revising and editing questions so you know the correct answers, correlating TEKS, and rationale explaining why the answer is correct. You can also easily navigate through this video using the chapters. Hi there, I'm Angela from Custom Classroom. Just a quick reminder, I'm not affiliated with TEA or STAAR. As a test prep writer and educator, I'm here to offer my interpretation and insights. Before I break down the test, I want to share some news. I just released a 12-week set of editing and revising warm-ups, and the best part is you can try 1 week for free. These practice questions mimic exactly what your students will see on the STAAR test, ensuring they are fully prepared to ace the exam. Click the link in the description and give it a try today. All right, let's begin with the STAAR English 1 release test from 2023, the editing section. So I've skipped to question 43. So this is for English 1 or 9th grade. Let's begin with the passage. Read the selection and choose the best answer to each question. In his science class, Raheem is learning about repurposing products. He wrote his paper to tell about a unique way some subway cars are being repurposed. Read Raheem's paper and look for corrections he needs to make. Then answer the questions that follow. Fish making their home in a submerged subway car. New passengers for old subway cars. In an average year, more than 1 billion people rely on the New York City subway system. About 6,500 subway cars combine to make up one of the nation's most efficient train systems. As technology has evolved, many of these subway cars have been replaced. So what does the city of New York do with the old subway cars? In the past, some were sold to be preserved or reused. However, most subway cars were scrapped for their metal. Eventually, the New York Metropolitan Transportation Authority came up with a better idea. In 2001, they began dropping old subway cars into the Atlantic Ocean to serve as artificial reefs. Naturally occurring reefs, or coral reefs, are ridges that are just below the surface of the ocean. They form gradually and create a diverse ecosystem, providing shelter and food for a vast array of marine life. The fish that live in and around coral reef have a great commercial value and significantly benefit local economies. At one time, the ocean floor along the Atlantic coast had been full of cracks and spaces in which fish could hide. Over the years, however, sand buildup, which made the ocean floor flat and unable to support its once thriving ecosystem. By dropping subway cars into the ocean, New York officials hoped to create ideal conditions in which new ecosystems could thrive. The cars would serve as surfaces for invertebrates to grow on and shelters for fish and other aquatic life. Before they could be used as reefs, the subway cars had to be thoroughly cleaned. Parts like seats and wheels were removed and sold or recycled. Any materials that could possibly decompose and pollute the water were also removed. Subway cars were ready. They were loaded into barges and carried out to sea to be dropped in various locations off the Atlantic coast. In total, more than 2,500 retired cars have now been dropped into the ocean to be used as artificial reefs. Today, the subway cars are crawling with life. Coral and barnacles that could never grow on the sandy ocean floor is spread across the walls of the subway cars. Different species of fish, such as tuna and flounder, now call the subway cars home. In the areas where the cars were dropped, more than 4 times more food than there was before. Local businesses are benefiting from the fishing opportunities, which in turn helped the overall economy. The project has been deemed a success, and those involved look forward to new underwater passengers using the cars for many years to come. All right, let's look at question number 43. Sentence 2 contains a spelling error. Select the response that will correct the error in this sentence. So let's look back at sentence 2. About 6,500 subway cars combine to make up one of the nation's most efficient train systems. So here we're going to find the correct spelling for efficient. Now, a great trick here for your students is the dictionary. So I click it open, start by typing the word that was actually in the passage. And so that was, nothing came up. So we know it is spelled incorrectly. So now we're going to pull up our drop down there. And so we've got, I'm going to type that word in. So I got the first one in. That one's, nothing's coming up, so that's not correct. Now it is a little bit more challenging because this disappears every time I click over, but so I'm going to keep checking these until I find the correct one. Okay, so here as I type, the final one is correct. It came back with one result, so I know this is the correct spelling for efficient. So 43 is labeled with 9 DVI, which is spelling. All right, 44. What change is needed in sentence 5? All right, so let's look back at sentence 5. In the past, some were sold to be preserved or reused. However, most subway cars were scrapped for their metal. So here A is saying change were sold to was sold. So in the past, some was sold to be preserved. So here changing it to was sold is creating a subject-verb agreement error. It's not something we need to change, so let's cross that off. B, change the comma after reused to a semicolon. So in the past, some were sold to preserve or reuse, semicolon. However, most subway cars were scrapped for their metal. That's correct because however is a conjunctive adverb and it's not a conjunction. So therefore it can't combine these two independent clauses. So we need the semicolon in there, but let's keep going. Change however to instead. So preserved or reused instead most subway cars. Here in this case, it's talking about how the subway cars were supposed to be preserved or reused and did not get scrapped for metal. So instead isn't really the best choice here. However, is a better contrast between these two options. So let's cross that off. D, change scrapped to scrapped. So they're seeing if it needs to have one P. So again, we're just going to go into our handy dictionary. This time it stays up, so it's easy to just type in. We're going to check it. Nope, it's changing it back to scrape. So let's just double check scrapped with two P's. Yep, here we go. It's right there. So we know that that was originally correct. So the answer here is B. 44 is labeled 9DV is punctuation. All right, 45. What change is needed in sentence 9? Let's look at sentence 9. They form gradually and create a diverse ecosystem providing shelter and food for a vast array of marine life. So let's look at A first. Change gradually to gradual. So they form gradual and create. Gradual would be an adjective form of gradually and would not be correct in this sentence. So let's cross that off. B, change create to creates. They form gradually and creates a diverse. So by changing it to creates, we would introduce a weird subject verb agreement error. So let's cross that off. C, insert a comma after ecosystem. They form gradually and create a diverse ecosystem, comma, providing shelter. And yeah, that sounds good because by inserting that comma, we're kind of clarifying that the coral reef and not the ecosystem are providing the shelter and food. So that's clarifying. All right, let's look at D. Change marine to marine. So is marine a proper noun that needs to be capitalized? No. So we're going to cross that off. So in this case, C is the correct answer. 45 is labeled 9DV, which is punctuation. 46. What change is needed in sentence 21? So let's go down here to 21. Coral and barnacles that could never grow on the sandy ocean floor is spread across the hard walls of the subway cars. All right, so here A is saying, should we change barnacles to barnacles? Does it need capital B? But barnacles is not a proper noun, so don't need to capitalize that, so let's cross it off. B, change could to couldn't. Coral and barnacles that couldn't never. Well, that is not making that sound any better. It's like a double negative, so we're going to cross that one off. C, insert a comma after floor. Coral and barnacles that could never grow on the sandy ocean floor, comma, is spread across the hard wall. Well, the comma after floor is not necessary. All right, let's look at D. Change is spread to are spread. So the coral and barnacles that could never grow on the sandy ocean floor are spread across the hard. Yes, that sounds great because coral and barnacles is plural here, and so it's requiring a plural verb. So are spread is correct. So this one on 46 is D. The answer is D. And it is labeled as 9DI, which is looking at a complete sentence and focusing some on like subject-verb agreement. All right, 47. What change needs to be made in sentence 24? All right, let's look down at 24. Local businesses are benefiting from the fishing opportunities, which in turn helped the overall economy. So A, change are benefiting to is benefiting. So local businesses is benefiting. Well, that's not correct because that would create a weird verb agreement there. So crossing that off. B, delete the comma after opportunities. So where local businesses are benefiting from the fishing opportunities, cut that out. No, that comma is needed, which in turn help the overall economy is a non-restrictive clause. So it must be set off from the rest of the sentence with a comma to clarify. So we're going to leave that comma. C, change helped to helps. Local businesses are benefiting from the fishing opportunity, which in turn helps the overall economy. Yes, that's correct. So helps is the present tense form of the verb to help, which is needed to keep the tense consistent throughout this sentence. So we're going to select that. And then let's look at D though. Change economy to a capital economy. So here economy is not a proper noun, so we don't need that. So we're going to cross that off. All right, so this ends this section of editing. If you'd like to see some more English 1 example questions, you can go on to the next section and there's 5 more to look at. All right, let's look at the STAAR English 1 release test from 2023. And I skipped here to question 31 so we can look at the revising section first. So this is the English 1 or 9th grade test. Let's begin with the passage. Read the selection and choose the best answer to each question. Layla wrote this story about a boy who had to babysit his younger cousin. Read Layla's paper and look for revisions she needs to make. Then answer the questions that follow. Babysitting Pedro. Julian groaned. He had just sat down at his desk to think of topics for his English essay when he heard his mother calling him. I'm in my room, he answered, seriously hoping that the impending conversation would be brief and straightforward. His mom appeared in his doorway and said, I'm so glad I found you, son. Oh, me too, Julian responded, teasingly, his face buried in his hands. Then he quickly apologized. He didn't want his mother to have the opportunity to scold him for a disrespectful attitude. Now, Julian, I know you have schoolwork, but your aunt really needs a babysitter for Pedro tonight. I can't, Julian interrupted. Aunt Linda is just going to have to find someone else. Now it was his mother's turn to interrupt, and her tone was serious. Listen, Julian, she began. Julian sat back and waited for what he knew was coming. The recurrent lecture was burned into his memory from previous occasions when his mother had reminded him that family members help one another. Sure enough, later that evening, he found himself supervising his precocious 2-year-old cousin, whose unruly behavior was only surpassed by his shocking knack for non-stop conversation, or jibber-jabber, as Julian called it. Julian stood over his aunt's stove, staring at the side of a box, and had to struggle to decipher the precise order of operations required to make macaroni and cheese. Juju school, Pedro screamed excitedly as he jumped in, bouncing circles around Julian's leg, occasionally grabbing Julian's jeans with his tiny, chubby hands to keep from toppling over. What school, Pedro? Julian replied absent-mindedly. Pedro replied in a stream of jibber-jabber that contained the words toys, brother, and buses. Not fluent in toddler speak, Pedro was detailing for Julian his last trip with his mother to pick up his older sibling from school. Julian was so focused on preparing a meal for Pedro that he had failed to notice his rambunctious young cousin had disappeared. His mother and Aunt Linda would surely frown upon him losing the toddler, so Julian ran from the kitchen into the dining room. Pedro, he called anxiously, but didn't get an answer. He flew from the dining room to Pedro's bedroom and found nothing. As he retraced his steps down the hallway and into the living room, he heard muffled laughter coming from Pedro's room. He drew closer to the sound and distinctly heard more giggling, along with, I hide from Juju. Clearly, Pedro was playing his favorite game, hide and seek. Julian laughed in spite of himself, though he felt more relieved than amused. He had not lost his little cousin after all. After half an hour of playing Pedro's version of hide and seek, where the toddler repeatedly hid under his own bed for Julian to discover him, the little boy made an announcement. Juju, I hungry, he said. Julian suddenly remembered the noodles boiling on the stove and raced to the kitchen to turn off the burner. The noodles were severely overcooked, but he mixed in the cheese, milk, and butter anyway. To his surprise, the dish didn't taste that bad. The consistency reminded him of lumpy, cheesy mashed potato dish, and Pedro seemed to love it. Juju cooked good, he exclaimed delightedly, flinging the cheesy noodles across the room. An hour later, when his mother called, Julian was wiping noodles and wiping cheese sauce off Pedro, off himself, off the wall, and off the floor. Julian, how's it going with Pedro? His mother asked. Mom, let's just say that I finally have a topic for my English essay. I'm going to write about overcoming challenges. His mother laughed. Let me guess, babysitting Pedro will be your title. I think so, Julian said. All right, now let's look at question 31. Layla wants to replace the phrase think of in sentence 2. Which word would be most effective to use in this sentence? So let's look back at sentence 2. He had just sat down at his desk to think of topics for his English essay when he heard his mother calling him. So we're trying to replace think of. So he had just sat down at his desk to scrutinize topics for his English essay when he heard his mother calling his name. Well, scrutinize means to examine. I don't know if he's examining. He's more like trying to think. So that's not getting more specific there. He had just sat down at his desk to divulge topics. Okay, so divulge is not really very effective because it means to share or to make something known. So that's not really the context here. All right, he just sat down at his desk to contemplate topics. That sounds great because contemplate means to think about or consider, which is what he's doing here. So let's select that one and keep going. He had just sat down at his desk to observe topics for his English essay. Okay, observe is to look at or see, which is not exactly what he's doing. That's kind of unclear. So let's cross that one off. So here, the best answer is C. And this question 31 is labeled 9C, which is to improve clarity. And specifically here, this is going to be like word choice clarity. All right, 32. In the box provided, combine the ideas in sentences 6 and 7 to create one clear and effective sentence. So let's look back at 6 and 7. Then he quickly apologized. He didn't want his mother to have the opportunity to scold him for a disrespectful attitude. So I always like to begin by typing the two complete sentences into the text box and then go from there. All right, so let's look at the sentences here. Then he quickly apologized. He didn't want his mother to have the opportunity to scold him for a disrespectful attitude. So here it's kind of two different thoughts, but they're repeating he a lot and him, so it's kind of confusing. So I would think about setting this apart. So then I don't think we need the he there because we have a he here. Then quickly apologized. He didn't want his mother to have the opportunity to scold him for a disrespectful attitude. So that's how I would combine these two. TEA hasn't come out with the exact scoring guide yet of the accepted responses, but from my previous knowledge of practice tests and other things I've seen, this is a good answer I would accept. This question 32 is labeled as 9C also, which is again, improving clarity, and specifically here it's to combine ideas. All right, 33. What revision, if any, is needed in sentence 16? So let's look down here at sentence 16. Julian stood over his aunt's stove, staring at the side of a box, and had struggled to decipher the precise order of operations required to make macaroni and cheese. Okay, so that's a mouthful. This is definitely going to need some revision here. So let's look at the options to see which one is improving on it. A, Julian stood over his aunt's stove, staring at the side of a box and struggling to decipher the precise order of operations required to make macaroni and cheese. So here, this one sounds a little bit better because it's using this word staring and then struggling, which kind of corrects this parallel structure in sentence 16. So let's select that and continue. Julian stood over his aunt's stove, staring at the side of a box that struggled to decipher the precise order of operations to make macaroni and cheese and the requirements. Okay, so this one is really struggles to decipher here. It's not logical. It's adding in a bunch of extra words, so we're going to cut that one out. C. Julian stood over his aunt's stove, staring and struggling to decipher the precise order of operations that were required to make macaroni and cheese on the side of the box. This one here, it's kind of reorganizing this and making it harder to follow and adding this on the side of the box toward the end. It's pretty confusing. So let's cross that one off. And we already know it's no, a change is needed because the first one is very confusing. So here, the best answer is answer A. 33 is labeled also as 9C, and here we're revising for clarity because the sentence was very confusing. 34. What is the most effective revision to make in sentence 20? All right, let's look at 20. Though not fluent in toddler speak, Pedro was detailing for Julian his latest trip with his mom to pick up his older sibling from school. So here, let's try to figure out what's needing to be improved. I think it's going to be something with some punctuation here. So let's see, because that kind of seemed very run-on. Though not fluent in toddler speak, Pedro detailed for Julian and described his latest trip with his mom to pick up his older siblings from school. So here it's kind of sticking Pedro in the middle here, making it very unclear. It makes it seem like Pedro does not understand his own words, so it's kind of confusing. So let's cut that one out. B, Julian can tell that Pedro was detailing his latest trip with his mom while picking up his older siblings from school, though not fluent in toddler speak. Okay, that one's pretty confusing and sticking things all over the place. It's very hard to follow. Okay, let's cross that one off. Though not fluent in toddler speak, Julian could tell that Pedro was detailing his latest trip with his mom to pick up his older siblings from school. Okay, that one sounds great. It flows. It places Julian correctly as the main subject here after this modifying phrase, and sounds pretty clear. All right, let's select that one. D, Pedro was detailing for Julian his latest trip with his mom, which was to pick up his older siblings from school, though not fluent in toddler speak. So again, here, this is unclear. It's sticking this kind of though not fluent in toddler speak right at the end, which kind of makes the sentence jumbled and confusing. So here C is the best answer choice. 34 is labeled also as 9C, which is revising, and here is again for clarity. All right, 35. Layla has included redundant information in sentence 37. What is the most effective way to revise this sentence? An hour later, when his mother called, Julian was wiping noodles and wiping cheese sauce off of Pedro, off himself, off the wall, and off the floor. Wow. Okay, that one definitely needs a lot of work. So let's see where's taken out all the repetitive parts. All right, A. An hour later, Julian was wiping off of Pedro, himself, the wall, and the floor, the noodles and cheese sauce when his mother called. Okay, so here it's kind of weird that they're listing what he's wiping off of separate from the actual thing he's wiping, so that doesn't make any sense. B, an hour later, Julian was wiping noodles and cheese sauce off of Pedro and himself and the wall and also the floor when his mother called. So here again, this series is not connected well, where it's off of Pedro and himself and the wall and also the floor. All right, C. An hour later, when his mother called, noodles and cheese sauce were being wiped off by Julian, himself, the wall, and the floor. All right, so here the way it's worded, it's kind of indicating that the wall is doing the wiping, and then it's listing all, it's very confusing to follow. So let's cross that one off. D, an hour later, when his mother called, Julian was wiping noodles and cheese sauce off of Pedro, himself, the wall, and the floor. There we go. We got it. In eliminated unnecessary words, we know that Pedro's actually the one wiping. What is he wiping? The noodles and cheese. He's wiping it off these things. Perfect. All right, so 35 is D, and it's labeled as 9C also, which is revising for clarity. Let's move on to 36. Which sentence should replace sentence 33 to bring this story to a more effective and creative closing? Okay, so let's look at this final sentence here. I think so, Julian said. So let's look at A first. Most likely, answered Julian, who was thinking quietly about his aunt and his little cousin. So here at the end, when he's kind of talking to his mom about overcoming challenges, his aunt is not really involved in this, so it's not effectively bringing this to a close. B, without a doubt, Julian replied with a smile as he wiped an errant noodle from the ceiling. So here, this one sounds great because it is referring back to his overcoming his challenges, like what he talked about throughout the story. And it is, the fact that this random noodle is still around kind of brings it all to a close in a more creative way. So let's select that, but keep going. C, maybe not, countered Julian, but he noticed his mom was looking at him suspiciously. So although his mother does call him, there's really no indication that she's actually here and can see him. So let's cross that one off. We'll see, Julian responded, pondering a host of topic ideas that he could share with his mother. So here, this kind of implies that Julian's experience is challenging, and so he's going to write about it for his paper, but nothing about having like multiple ideas, and it's not really tying it all together. So here, B is the best choice. 36 is labeled as 9BI, which is structure, and specifically here, focusing in on the conclusion. So that's the end of this section of revising, but if you move on, There are 6 more revising questions that you can go over. Hopefully, it has a more variety of standards because that last one was pretty 9C heavy. Make sure you don't miss out. Click the link in the description now to get a whole week of my amazing editing and revising warm-ups for free. Don't wait. Grab this incredible opportunity while you can.